I'm Dan Farber, editor-in-chief of CBSNews.com, and I'm joined today by Sarah Dutton, who's the director of surveys for CBS News, and we're here to talk about your recent survey, which is on President Obama's first 100 days, as well as a few other topics such as race relations and terrorism. But let's start with the 100 days poll. 68% approval. How does that stand versus other presidents?
You know, he fares pretty well compared to other recent presidents. George W. Bush got 56% at his 100-day mark. Bill Clinton got 49%, right around the same time. But Barack Obama doesn't do as well as some of the older presidents. John F. Kennedy got 83%, Dwight Eisenhower 72%. So he stacks up well compared to the most recent presidents.
Well, some of these other numbers are fairly interesting, which is that people were asked about Obama making progress for the country getting out of recession, and it was 52% approved and 45% said they didn't, which is very close to the actual election numbers.
I think that's true. Certainly we're finding sizable percentage of Americans who think he is starting to make some progress dealing with the two big issues confronting the country, the economy, which is overwhelmingly the top issue Americans care about, and the war in Iraq. But we also asked people whether they thought he was going to be able to definitively end the recession and end the war in Iraq by the end of his first term. And there we saw the numbers were a little bit lower. 37% think that he will be able to get the U.S. out of recession by the end of his first term. 44% think he'll be able to get the U.S. out of the war in Iraq by the end of his first term. So they certainly see him as having made progress, but they don't expect that he's going to be able to solve these problems quickly.
That sounds like a very pragmatic survey audience. Now, another one that was interesting was on keeping campaign promises, and here he really outdid Bush. He had 37% saying that he would be able to keep versus 18% for George W. Bush.
You know, I think that really reflects the extraordinarily high degree of optimism that we're seeing about this presidency. Just about 3/4 of Americans are optimistic about the next 4 years with Barack Obama as president. That's a very high number. People are really enthusiastic and feel very positively about his presidency, and I think that goes away towards explaining some of the numbers we're seeing here in terms of expectations.
Another number that came up was 74% think that he is tough enough to make hard decisions. Now that's really surprising, given that when he came into office he was thought of as more of a politician slash law professor. Yeah,
a little cerebral, exactly. And in fact, I think there have been some recent charges that he wasn't being too tough. What's also interesting, though, about that number is at the same time, about 4 out of 5 Americans say that they think he cares about the needs and problems of people like themselves, including more than half who think he cares a lot. So while on the one hand he's certainly seen as tough enough to deal with the kinds of problems that a president has to face, he's also viewed as fairly empathetic towards most Americans.
Now, speaking of empathetic, let's move on to race relations, which was really some surprising results, where 59% of African Americans say that race relations are good compared to only 29% 1 year ago.
This is an astonishing change that we've found in this poll. First, I should explain that we conducted interviews with an additional number of African Americans to ensure that we had a sizable sample to base our findings on, and we did that quite a number of times throughout the 2007 and 2008 campaign cycles. Oftentimes we don't get quite enough to look at in an individual poll, so we wanted to be sure we'd done that. And what we've seen in the entire time that we've been asking this question, going way back years and years, is an enormous gap between the views of whites and blacks on the state of race relations in the U.S., with far more whites saying it's good than blacks. We found nearly a 30 percentage point gap last July, and that was fairly typical from what we'd seen in the previous 10 or so years. But that gap has completely shrunk in this poll. As you said, 59% of blacks now say that race relations in the U.S. are good, but 65% of whites also do. So there really is no gap. That 30-point difference that we saw just last July has evaporated in this poll, and that's quite astonishing.
You know, what was curious is that the majority of people survey do not directly relate those results to the presidency of Obama.
No, they don't. You know, we asked whites and blacks, whether they thought that Barack Obama's presidency had directly improved race relations in the U.S., and around half told us that race relations were the same regardless of his presidency, but certainly far more said that his presidency was a good thing for race relations rather than a bad thing.
Another result was that 96% of African Americans approved his overall job, compared to only 62% for whites. Is that a kind of expected result?
I think it is, certainly given the levels of black support that we saw for Barack Obama during the campaign, and certainly in last November's general election. I don't think that's surprising. You know, more than 9 in 10 African Americans are optimistic about the next 4 years with Barack Obama as president. 9 in 10 of them feel he cares about them. The 9 in 10 think that he is going to unite the country. Those are all overwhelming majorities, nearly all. It's nearly unanimous among African Americans in terms of positive views of this president.
Now, the other topic that you surveyed on is something that's very current right now, which is the issue of torture and waterboarding. And interestingly, 62% said that hearings regarding this and bringing some of those who were, part of the team that approved waterboarding should not happen. And obviously, this is mostly a Republican number, but the Democrats were very divided as well.
Yeah, they were. We did not see overwhelming support for holding hearings, investigating members of the Bush administration for their decisions about use of aggressive interrogation techniques such as waterboarding. 46% of Democrats said that hearings should be held, but 51%, slightly more, say that they should not be held. So we're not seeing any kind of groundswell of support to have Congress hold hearings on the matter. Certainly, as you mentioned, 9 in 10 Republicans are against the idea of doing that.
Well, Sarah, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
Been speaking with Sarah Dutton, the Director of Surveys for CBS News. For CBSNews.com, I'm Dan Farber.